Welcome back to the podcast. Hope you are well. Today we're going to be exploring nicotine, but through a bit more of a nuanced lens, not just through this distorted perspective of cultural stigma or marketing campaigns, but as a compound that does have its fair share of both positive and negative effects on our body and neurochemistry. Now, nicotine, the molecule itself, not a cigarette, is a compound that, when isolated from the delivery mechanisms that can cause disease and mortality, combustion, inhalation of particle matter, exposure to carcinogens, present a fundamentally different risk benefit profile than most people actually understand. And depending on how you use it, the dosing strategy you employ, and delivery method you select, nicotine can either significantly impair your health and create profound dependence, or serve as a targeted cognitive and potentially body comp and performance enhancement tool. So let me be clear about what we know from the research. Nicotine, administered via clean delivery methods, produces measurable improvements in attention, working memory, reaction time, mood regulation. It suppresses appetite through the central nervous system pathways. It increases metabolic rate quite mildly, but definitely there is some action at play there. Creates a state of calm, focused alertness that many high performers, neuroscientists, surgeon, military operators, entrepreneurs, I've heard of lawyers using it strategically for cognitively demanding tasks. And personally, big fan of nicotine. I use it specifically during fasted states, prior to my client check-ins, or deep work blocks. Say I'm doing research or making notes on a podcast. I did in fact use it to research this one. And it's great when used in context requiring sustained cognitive output, when, of course, dosed appropriately. And the neurochemical benefits you get, quite worthwhile in my opinion. However, and this is important, nicotine does carry some risks. It is a tool, and just like anything, one could take. Misuse can 100% lead to tolerance, dependence, and a cascade of negative physiological outcomes. And that is precisely the issue I want to address in this episode, because there's a lot of public discourse surrounding nicotine, and they either exist on two extremes. One end, you got the complete, let's say, demonization. Nicotine is categorically dangerous, avoided under all circumstances. On the other hand, you got reckless promotion. Instagram ads like nothing I've seen before, saying it's fantastic without any acknowledgement of addiction or potential long-term health implications. And neither perspective reflects what the scientific literature actually supports. So today, in this episode, we're going to go over nicotine from head to toe. We're going to first go over the neurobiological benefits of nicotine, its effects on attention, dopamine, serotonin, metabolic rate, and cognitive performance, of course. Then how the delivery method is where the majority of the risks come from. So we'll go over the difference between smoking, vaping, gum, pouches, patches, then the safety profile within those, then the risks like addiction mechanisms, sleep disruption, cardiovascular stress, and there's also some negative metabolic outcomes as well. We'll then explore the strategic application of nicotine as a cognitive or mental performance enhancement tool, and potentially a fat loss tool. And then finally, a practical framework to work off, so dosing guidelines, cycling strategies, frequency, and some red flags that are a good sign you should probably chill with the nicotine. So at its core, what does nicotine actually do at a mechanistic level? Why do certain populations of high-performing individuals, like I said, surgeons who require very, very fine motor precision and sustained focus during long procedures, military operators who need on-demand cognitive enhancement in like the most high-stake environment, elite entrepreneurs, biohackers, well, these individuals are not smoking. They are not vaping. Most of the time, they are using nicotine through controlled delivery mechanisms. And they are doing so for a specific reason, because nicotine is a stimulant, but it is simply not like an arousal compound like caffeine. Its mechanism of action is a little bit more selective, because when you administer nicotine through a clean delivery method, such as gum or such as pouches, it rapidly crosses the blood-brain barrier and binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. This binding initiates a cascade of neurochemical events. So this will look like increased acetylcholine transmission, rapid dopamine release. It increases norepinephrine, and there is some modest increases in serotonin as well. So the outcome of that cascade is a fairly rapid improvement of attention, working memory, cognitive processing speed, which studies do consistently demonstrate. They've shown reaction time decreases, errors in attention decrease, mental fatigue is attenuated, and this effect is particularly pronounced in deprived individuals. Again, so when you're looking at a military operator who's operating on 4 or 5 hours a night, becomes a great freaking tool. And when cognitive resources are depleted, nicotine can partially restore function and kind of bring you back up to baseline. Almost similar to creatine that studies have shown. And you achieve what is described as like that locked in, that nootropic, that focused state, which is why it can be such an amazing tool. Now, nicotine also influences mood regulation because it does, like I said, increase the release of dopamine, which will enhance motivation and drive. And it also modestly increases serotonin and beta endorphin levels, which does give people a subtle elevation of their baseline mood and a reduced perception of fatigue. And at the same time, it reduces GABAergic inhibition, GABA being the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter of the brain. The net effect of all of that being increased motivation while also reducing the internal resistance, or like the mental friction that typically accompanies effortful tasks. But there are measurable metabolic effects as well, which is why nicotine can be considered a tool for fat loss, and something I definitely use in moderation when I'm dieting, definitely taking advantage of it. I tend to adopt more of an intermittent fasting approach. So in the morning, and I'll push my meals back. So I'll use nicotine during that morning window, that fasted window, because for one, suppresses appetite, specifically by activating actually the same neurons targeted by GLP-1 agonists. It also increases thermogenesis, which is heat production, and caloric expenditure by approximately 3 to 5%. So not a dramatic fat loss intervention in that sense. You will not achieve significant body composition changes from nicotine alone. However, during a caloric deficit, when hunger is higher, when energy is a little lower, potentially, nicotine can reduce appetite, which, in my opinion, the main benefit towards fat loss. And there's also an effect that is pretty overlooked, but it's why some surgeons use it, and that is enhanced fine motor control. So unlike other stimulants like high dose caffeine, which make you all jittery, nicotine does not Nicotine does not induce that shakiness or tremors you get with that crazy high caffeine intake, but it actually improves your steadiness, your motor steadiness. So overall, we have a compound that improves attention. We have a compound that improves working memory, increases dopamine and motivation, mood lift, suppresses appetite, modestly increases metabolic rate, improves fine motor control. It acts rapidly within 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the delivery mechanism, of course. It has a relatively short duration of action, approximately 30 to 60 minutes. This means it does not accumulate in the system or disrupt sleep architecture when used appropriately earlier in the day. However, and this is a pretty critical transition point on this topic because I just made it sound like the best compound on earth, all the benefits I just went over are quite contingent upon one variable, the delivery method, because the route of administration does not merely influence the bioavailability, it fundamentally determines whether nicotine is a useful tool or becomes severely harmful. And this is when individuals hear like nicotine, the immediate association with cancer, cardiovascular disease, deleterious health outcomes. First time I whipped out a nicotine gum from my mom, that was her reaction. She was like, what is that? And to be fair, it's because she associated with smoking. It's a common misconception. Unless you looked into nicotine itself, because nicotine itself, not the primary cause of smoking-related disease, the method of delivery is. The vast majority of morbidity and mortality associated with nicotine, over 90%, is attributed to combustion and inhalation of toxic byproducts, not the nicotine molecule itself. So with that said, let's look at the delivery methods, and let's rank them from highest to lowest risk. So at the most dangerous end of the spectrum, you probably guessed it, smoking. Cigarettes, cigars, pipes, any method involving combustion and inhalation of smoke. When you burn organic material and inhale the smoke, you are not merely consuming nicotine. You are exposing yourself to, I believe it's over 7,000 chemical compounds, including tar, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, benzene, arsenic, and a bunch more that drive carcinogenesis. And these are compounds that cause endothelial dysfunction, atherosclerosis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, peripheral vascular disease, infertility as well. And this is where the reputation of nicotine as a lethal substance originates from. The delivery method, not the actual compound. So at the worst end, the most deleterious, we have smoking, which is responsible for the overwhelming majority of long-term health consequences historically attributed to nicotine use. Then we got slightly less harmful, but still highly problematic. We got chewing tobacco, dip, because while these products They do not involve combustion, so you avoid inhaling the smoke. You are still exposing your oral tissues to fermented tobacco leaves, which contain heavy metals such as cadmium, lead, as well as tobacco-specific carcinogens, which do result in elevated risk of oral cancers, tooth loss, even gastrointestinal cancers from swallowing that material. So, first two, I would avoid these entirely. I wouldn't touch smoking or dip. Now, next we have vaping, quite the controversial one, which is less harmful than smoking. The research is pretty clear on this because you eliminate combustion, which removes the vast majority of the carcinogenic exposure. However, you are still inhaling aerosolized compounds, so vegetable glycerin, flavoring agents, thermal degradation products such as formaldehyde and acetaldehyde at low concentrations, but along with ultrafine particles that can cause pulmonary inflammation. They can definitely cause endothelial stress, cardiovascular effects, particularly with chronic use, which is usually the case when somebody has a vape. And emerging data has been showing mild lung dysfunction and endothelial stress from vaping. So, yes, vaping, I guess, harm reduction compared to smoking. It's orders of magnitude safer, but it's definitely not far from harm elimination. Now, on to the significantly safer delivery methods. So, we got nicotine gum, we got lozenges, pouches, and toothpicks. Because these methods, smoke free, combustion free, they do not involve inhalation of particle matter into the lungs, and this itself eliminates approximately 99% of the toxic exposure associated with smoking. And this is why these delivery methods are utilized in nicotine replacement therapy and are actually recommended by public health organizations to help people quit smoking. However, it's worth mentioning, even with these clean delivery methods, they're not entirely without risk, particularly when misused. Again, like anything, the dose largely the poison. So if you are using high dose pouches, 6 to 12 milligrams, repeatedly throughout the day, you will induce chronic sympathetic nervous system activation. That will lead to elevated blood pressure. You will impair your insulin sensitivity and very, very likely develop tolerance and then dependence. And the CDC has noted rising rates of mouth ulcers in teens using these products. On one hand, while these delivery methods are dramatically safer than smoking or vaping, not completely benign. So that leaves us with the safest delivery method, which is transdermal patches. And these release nicotine slowly over hours, producing a steady state plasma concentration without rapid peaks, which minimizes the addiction potential because we're not getting that rapid spike in dopamine. And the patches, they take hours to reach their peak effect. So might as well run through the hierarchy. So we got smoking, extreme risk. We got chewing tobacco, pretty damn high risk. We got vaping, moderate risk. We got gum, pouches, lozenges, low to moderate risk. And then that's also depending on the dose and frequency. And then we got the transdermal patches, which are the lowest risks. So the risk being addiction, honestly, because nicotine binds to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, triggering dopamine release, which is why nicotine does feel so rewarding. But your brain adapts with repeated exposure. Your receptor density changes. Dopamine signaling becomes a little more blunted. You'll start to require more nicotine to achieve the same effect that 2 milligrams when you first chewed it basically had you achieving. So at this stage, you are no longer using nicotine to enhance your focus as a tool, kind of using it to restore baseline function. And you go too far down that path, you can find yourself relying on it because without it, you will experience withdrawal symptoms like irritability, difficulty concentrating, mood instability. So at that point, if you reach that point, nicotine no longer performance enhancing tool, you're simply preventing withdrawal. Now, the next downside we have to be aware of is its effect on sleep because nicotine, like I said, is a stimulant. It increases alertness, increases heart rate, delays sleep onset if taken too close to bed because although it does have a shorter half-life of caffeine, approximately like 2 hours, consuming nicotine within 2 hours of sleep can delay REM sleep onset. It can fragment your sleep cycles and it will impair your sleep quality. And here's precisely where you can find yourself in a vicious cycle because poor sleep, what it'll do, degrade next day cognitive function. So to compensate, you consume more stimulants like nicotine, creating a dependency loop where nicotine is required to overcome the cognitive deficits caused by nicotine in the first place, induced by sleep disruption. Third, physiological stress, because even the clean delivery methods, nicotine increases heart rate by approximately 10 beats per minute and elevates systolic blood pressure by 6 to 10 millimeters of mercury. So over the long term, Chronic use contributes to arterial stiffness and potentially endothelial dysfunction, which does increase cardiovascular risk. And it also has a mild diuretic effect, which can definitely affect your hydration status if fluid intake is not on point. So staying on top of your hydration, obviously essential, nevertheless. Now, the overarching point I want to emphasize is that it is risk dose dependent. 2 milligrams, which I personally take before a deep work block, likely fine. 10 to 15 milligrams daily with no breaks, you're creating dependence, metabolic dysfunction, cardiovascular stress. So the question becomes, can you utilize nicotine as a cognitive enhancement tool, as an appetite suppressant without developing dependence, without disrupting sleep, or incurring any deleterious health effects? And in my opinion, the answer is yes, but only by sticking to the following framework. First, only use nicotine when you have clear intent. Nicotine should never become your baseline state. It should be a specific tool deployed for a specifically cognitively demanding task. So use it during your deep work sessions where you require sustained attention, focus, potentially times where you need to be super locked in and just want to be completely on it. So you got an exam or something. And then sleep deprived states where your cognitive function is going to be compromised and you still need to mentally perform at a certain level. And second, dose minimally. So we want the minimum effective dose. So for most individuals, that's 1 to 4 milligrams. Many people, particularly those who have never smoked, will experience cognitive benefits at 1 to 2 milligrams. And high dose products like 8 to 12 milligrams, in my opinion, completely unnecessary and will become counterproductive. So use the minimum effective dose. Third, limit your frequency. We want to avoid chronic use, and this is where people fall off the cliff. They, pop some nicotine gum, then 36 minutes later, another, then 36 minutes later, another, and within weeks, they're consuming 10 to 15 doses of a 2 milligram gum per day and have developed pretty severe dependence. So ideally, and this is my opinion, your daily limit should be under 8 milligrams total, and I distribute that across a maximum of 1 to 3 sessions. So you're spacing that dose out by at least like 90 minutes, ideally multiple hours to allow your neurochemistry to return to baseline before then hitting it again with more nicotine. Fourth, implement cutoff. So I'd stop all nicotine consumption at least 2 hours before bed, preferably longer if you are a little bit more sensitive to stimulants. And this is a non-negotiable because even if you feel subjectively capable of sleeping, nicotine will take a hit on your sleep quality, which will make your recovery, your cognitive function, performance, body comp changes the following day all worse. And lastly, what I like to do personally is cycle it to prevent tolerance, because even at low doses, chronic use will produce receptor downregulation. So to maintain efficacy without dependence, I'd implement one of the two cycling strategies. The first, which I do, is the 5 to 2 weekly cycle. I use it Monday through Friday, and then I just simply don't use it on weekends. And this provides a 48-hour receptor recovery period every week, and I found prevents tolerance, prevents the accumulation of tolerance as well. Or you could go 3 weeks on, 1 week off, which will be equally as effective in my personal experience. So overall, not here to tell you to use nicotine or to not use nicotine, but just provide you with the information needed to make a educated decision on your use if you use it at all. And that is a wrap on today's podcast. Again, you want 30 days of free transformation advice, tips that'll fast track your ability to build muscle, drop body fat, have more energy, optimize your health. You'll get 2 free training plans, your nutrition set up for you, much more to transform your physique, your health, performance. You can click the first link in the description. And for coaching, if you're interested in acquiring Fire and more, and discount codes on the supplements I use, those are linked in the description as well. Appreciate you for being here. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.